Hello friends, 2022 just started, but I think I have a top 10 read for 2022 already. During my video reviews, I always feel like I should mention, or just remind everyone who's not familiar, those of you who aren't familiar with my reviews or kind of my take on reviews or discussions about books, is I like to go into books blind. I don't like to know much of anything going into it. I don't even like to read the synopsis a lot of times. So when I give a review, when I do a video review especially, I try and be as vague as possible and don't give you any plot points or characters. I try not to give anything away because I want you to go into this book and experience it from step one. I don't want to tell you what happens or who the characters are or what they go through. That doesn't really make sense to me. So when I do a review, I'll give you I'll be as vague as possible. So I'll give you enough to know kind of what you're getting into, but I'll try to not spoil anything for you. The first thing that got me interested in Gunmetal Gods is this cover. And that cover is just awesome. I love that cover. It pulled me in. It's one of those books that pulled me in. I mean, I heard about it in the dark fantasy grimdark community, but that cover is so cool, I just had to read it. So I picked up Gunmetal Gods, not really knowing much about it. I do like to go into books blind, so I didn't really look into it too much. I just know that it was a grimdark story, and I've heard comparisons to other books that I really enjoyed. Have you ever started a book and just felt like it was written for you? Like the author specifically wrote it for you? Like you feel like when you read it, you feel like you're home. You feel like this is where I belong. That's the way I felt reading Gunmetal Gods. Now I will say that Gunmetal Gods is violent. There is a lot of there's a lot of brutality. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of disturbing moments in it. So just a heads up that is the kind of story this is. It's a very dark and violent and brutal and unforgiving type of story. So just a heads up on that. Now, too often in fantasy, characters are one-dimensional, and I don't mean to pick on fantasy. Just giving an example of in the genre that there's a lot of this is the good character, this is the bad character, this is why you should love the good character, and this is why you should hate the bad character. These are it kind of sets the table. It's the stereotypical good character versus the bad. Now the world in Gunmetal Gods is vivid and bright and rich, and it's just dripping with just so many different, it's dripping with religion, with war, with history, with lore, with just battles, and just all this stuff packed into this world. And it's another one of those books that there's a ton of world building, and when you finish, there's this beautiful world, and that it's also brutal and violent and unforgiving, but it is just packed full of stuff. It's packed full of potential stories. Now, in the world, these characters that we follow, they've done some really terrible things. They've done some really good things. They do really bad and terrible things. They do really good things. They're evil. They're good. They're also cowards. They're weak. They're sensitive. They're damaged. They feel like people, because people aren't one-dimensional. People have many different sides. Someone can do something really good and they can do something really bad, and no one is just black and white. And that's why I love these types of stories, because you wonder, who am I supposed to be rooting for? And you go back and forth with, can I root for both of them? Can I root against both of them? So you're conflicted on who should I be rooting for in this story? Who should I be kind of putting my hopes behind? Who do I want to succeed? Who do I want to fail? And that's a constant battle you have as you read this book. Now, the battles in Gunmetal Gods aren't a huge part of the story. Now, they're a huge part of the history, and they're a huge part of the story, but they're not. Battles don't happen all the time. That's another thing in fantasy that I don't enjoy, is just battle after battle after battle. There's a lot of setup. When the battles happen, they happen, and they're just violent and brutal, and you know that someone's going to suffer. Another thing that I love about Gunmetal Gods is sometimes the battle is just the beginning, and that's not the worst of it. Sometimes the worst of it is after. What happens after a city is conquered? What happens after a city is taken? What's the aftermath? What happens to the people left over? What happens to the army that comes in and takes over? What happens after that? What's the fallout? What's the result of this battle that just happened? Don't get me wrong, the battles are something else, but and another thing that I enjoyed about it is that it doesn't get into every little detail of the battle. You know what's happening, but it doesn't get into every little sword swing and every little block and every little thing that happens. It gives you an overview, but it doesn't get too detailed to where it gets bogged down with those details in the battles. I was immersed in this world from page one with the battles and the history and the religion and the politics and the characters in this world. I mean, it pulled me in right away. Reading about these characters' lives and their successes and their failures and their losses was as much fun I've had since I read the Ash and Sand trilogy. It is that good. It is so good. And I loved it. And then, so very quickly, the author, Zamil Akhtar, shot up my list of authors that I will be following. I mean, I can't say enough good things about Gunmetal Gods. I loved it. I love the brutality. I love the flawed and damaged characters. I loved learning about their history, about this world, the politics, the religions, the creatures in it, the gods in it, how this story unfolds. There's a lot of twists and turns that I wasn't expecting. And when I went back to kind of gather my thoughts on the blog post that I wrote and also for this review, I went back and when I read books now, I'll take a picture of the page sometimes, and then I'll write in my little reading journal thing. And when I went back to check and to kind of refresh my memory on some of these major events and these points in the book, I noticed things that I didn't notice the first time. And I love that about books like this. It's a little foreshadowing I noticed in just a few pages that I had pictures of on my phone when I went back to write my notes and to write the blog post. And I love when that happens. So if you can't tell, I'm a huge fan of Gunmetal Gods. I can't wait to get into book 2. We are having a meetup with the author and some friends at the end of January of 2022. So if you're watching this before that happens, you're welcome to join us. Check our forum calendar for more details. If you watch this after January of 2022, I will link that video up above and down below so you can check it out. But had just a wonderful time. If you're a fan of grimdark, of dark fantasy, of rich, lush worlds, of these brutal, unforgiving, violent, just dripping with detail world, these characters who run that middle gray area, who aren't black or white or good or evil. I mean, it is just this epic, violent, brutal, unforgiving, touching story that had me on page 1. So have you read Gunmetal Gods? If you have, let me know down below what you thought of it. As always, I hope this review was helpful, and I will talk to you soon.